Welcome to the Success, Quality and Requirements Value of the Systems Thinking Approach webinar. This webinar is hosted by Systems Thinking Specific Interest Group, which is a joint APM and UK chapter of the International Council for Systems Engineering, or INCOSE group. That group itself was set up to foster and encourage better integration between project management and systems engineering, drawing on industrial and academic expertise from across the two professional bodies. So as one of the presenters, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you very much for finding the time in your busy schedules and participate in our webinar. And without further ado, I think we're going to step into today's webinar. As I said, it's brought to you by the three of us, Frank, Andrew, and myself. And between the three of us, we will see that on the screen, various companies that we have been involved with in terms of systems engineering and project management alike. And actually, between the three of us, we have over a century's worth of integrated systems engineering and project management experience. In essence, what we, the three of us, have been doing for over 100 years is learning what is it that makes projects successful. And today, what we would like to do is share some of our thinking and those experiences with you in hope that it will aid you with making your projects a success. Now, generally speaking, there are several questions that are often posed about the definition, the value, and the link between the project success, quality, requirements, and systems thinking. And you're looking at these on the screen right now. We will take you through them, addressing each of the points that you see. And Andrew is going to start talking to us about why is the quality important in projects. Andrew.
Thanks, Baney. Finishing on time and within budget is not much consolation if the result of the project doesn't work. Now, that's a quote from Prince 2, but I've seen it time and time again in real life. And I'd like to illustrate that with London's Millennium Bridge. Connecting St. Paul's and the Tate Modern, work started in May 1999, and the bridge opened just over a year later in June 2000. Just to close 2 days later because the bridge was swaying violently as people crossed it. Why was this? People were walking the wrong way. Synchronized lateral excitation. The bridge needed passive damping. It reopened 18 months later. Modifications added £5 million to the original 18 million construction cost. So the first thing I think we need to discuss is what is quality? So Barney, would you like to give me your thoughts?
Well, quality is defined in so many different ways, but personally, to me, it is a question about quality you can also state as how accurate is the result against the target. But to be able to hit the target, you need to understand the both target itself and the measure of accuracy that you apply to it, and both need to be predefined. And when that is the case, then you are able to know if the deliverables actually meets the required quality. Just to leave you with another thought, you can say that customer satisfaction is the after effect of quality.
Thanks. And Frank, would you like to add something to that?
For me, quality is all about achieving the value of the client. For example, both the Rolls-Royce and the Volkswagen are excellent cars, but if you deliver either one of them, both on time and within cost, but your client is expecting a Volkswagen and you give him a Rolls-Royce, then you actually haven't achieved the quality.
I think it really boils down to two definitions which are subtly different that I've seen come out of a lot of manufacturing background. One is the fitness for purpose. A quality product will do the job it's supposed to do. But also it's the degree of conformance to requirements. Does something meet the requirements? And those are both reflected in the APM Box 6 definition. A subtle difference, I say, because sometimes the documented requirements, and we'll come back to that, do not line up with what is fit for purpose.
That is very true. So now let's focus about the next question. Why should we manage quality? Frank.
So why should we manage quality? I'd like to illustrate this by taking the example of Heathrow Terminal 5. Heathrow Terminal 5 was a great project. It was delivered on time, within budget, and better than projected safety record. However, testing, training, and provision for the human element was swept aside in the sprint for the line. The full scope wasn't recognized. It wasn't fit for purpose. The complete set of requirements looking at T5 as an operational system were not recognized and sufficiently defined. And this led to the situation you see on the slide where once the terminal was opened, there was a tremendous backlog of bags and the operational environment was not entered to successfully. I'd like to use another example from my experience in the nuclear industry, and that is the Baraka nuclear power station constructed in the UAE. The hardware of the plants were delivered in record time, but the software nuclear operation program of processes, people and systems lagged behind, so the nuclear license to start up the plants was delayed. It is often the software requirements which get overlooked. Using systems thinking helps to identify and recognize these early in the project so that they get the necessary attention.
By comparison, the Millennium Bridge in Greece achieved 0 fatalities. It opened 4 months early with its costs on target. And this is an earthquake zone. It actually crosses the boundaries between 2 tectonic plates. And this was a major design challenge. The success was largely due to requirements that were clear and well documented before construction started. Leadership focused on the technical problems and solutions rather than financial issues, about looking for solutions, not blame. Excellent preparation. Scope and dynamics were thoroughly explored and quality was designed in from the start. And this was complemented by a strong emphasis on people. Roles and responsibilities were clearly defined, and a team spirit was fostered and built up that crossed organizational boundaries. There's an exercise that I run in workshops, and this investigates where problems arise on projects by sampling the audience experience, and I see the same result every time. If we look at the iron triangle, roughly 10% of project issues are seen as arising from time problems. Roughly 10% are to do with cost problems, but a whopping 80% of project issues are due to quality problems.
And that is a staggering amount, but actually from personal experience, unfortunately, it does feel right as well. So let's have a look at the benefits of quality. So seeing how many issues are stemming from it. So it's not that difficult to sort of translate into what could be the benefits of the quality. And they broadly fall into these 4 categories. They are help with the safety, they help with the time, with the money and reputation. And all of those together then effectively lead towards improved, if not excellent, customer satisfaction. But each one of these topics is quite meaty in its own right. So let's have a look into a little bit more detail on each of them. So when we say about the benefits of quality when it comes to safety, when it comes to saving lives, unfortunately, we are all more than familiar with the look of the Grenfell Tower. And if you will recall, it was June 2017, a fire broke out in the 24-story tower block. It killed 72, it injured more than 70, and 223 people managed to escape. This was the deadliest structural fire in the United Kingdom since the Piper Alpha disaster, and the worst UK residential fire since Second World War. At the end of the day, after the full inquiry was completed in 2018, the cause of the rapid spread of fire was found to be a combination. It was the cladding materials that were used and inadequate sprinkler system, all to do with the quality of how that project was put together. When it comes to saving time, the picture you're seeing now is that of a Scottish Parliament, beautiful building. It was delivered 3 years late. Key contributory factors to that is the design wasn't finalized before construction and that the estimates were not backed by credible cost estimation process. So talking a little bit more about the cost, the Scottish Parliament overran the initial cost by about a factor of 10. Thinking back to the Grenfell Tower, the tower itself was insured for about £20 million, but the direct costs of the fire are likely to be substantially higher. Looking at, according to the Times, the financial impact of that fire could reach as high as £1 billion. And that is due to a combination of litigation, compensation for deaths and injuries, rehousing, rehabilitation, the cost of demolishing and rebuilding, as well as the possibility that similar other tower blocks may have to be improved and or evacuated. Saving reputation. How does quality benefit reputation? Unfortunately, even there, we have a number of examples from various industries about that matter. So the hospital you're looking at was created in 2013, and I found the Daily Mail excerpt where the headlines were awash with the story, and the title was "Farce of the New 554 Million NHS Hospital, which is too small. Flagship unit forced to reopen old wards at the site it replaced." Another large story was, in the same year, was abandonment of the NHS IT system. Years on, in October 2018, there were still headlines that were following that story and remembering those issues, talking about every NHS IT project. So one of the more recent ones was stating, for example, Matt Hancock, who runs Department of Health, is marching with ill-founded confidence towards what he describes as a technical revolution. And a significant part of the article was focusing on an array of past project issues in NHS. So that is a direct impact to reputational impact, which tends to carry on. And then, doesn't quality cost? Yes, it does. But it costs so much more if the projects get it wrong. So cost of quality is a known methodology that allows an organization to determine the extent to which its resources are used for activities that are solely there to prevent poor quality. So the COPQ, or the cost of poor quality, is defined as the costs associated with providing poor quality products or services. And they fall into four categories. So the first one is internal failure costs. Internal failure costs are the ones that are associated with defects found before the customer receives the product or service. And then conversely, external failure costs, they are the ones that are associated with defects found after the customer receives the product or service. The third category is the appraisal costs, and they are the ones that the organization incurs in determining the degree of conformance to quality requirements. And last but not least, the prevention costs category. They are the ones that are incurred to keep failure from occurring in the first place, and appraisal costs to the minimum. The staggering the amount of cost that it adds up to is the fact that the average COPQ is 15% of revenue in manufacturing. And as Benjamin Franklin quite rightfully says, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. So let's think about, how does quality save us money? Where do quality problems start? Andrew.
Thanks. Well, most of our thinking about quality has come from manufacturing. And if we look at this model up on the screen at the moment, manufacturing started looking at components only, looking at things that had been made and then inspecting them to make sure that they fell within tolerance. When mass production came along, though, this could result in incredible cost and waste, and so the concept of quality control was introduced as a development, which looked at a little bit earlier in the life cycle, and expanded the focus purely from components to look at the quality of the manufacturing processes themselves. This is great, but still not good enough, because we still have a lot of scrap or waste, and so the scope was further expanded with the concept of quality assurance to try and bake in quality to what was being produced. So this required planning and design for quality, and that obviously required the management processes that were involved looked from a quality perspective on the problem. And then in the 80s, we were all benefiting in our consumer durables through the introduction of total quality management, where organizations took on a culture of quality thinking, and quality was part of their thinking from the word go. And total quality management isn't a term that's used very much today, though I did hear it last week. The reason for that is not that it's no longer with us or no longer relevant, but in fact total quality management is a key component of lean manufacturing, and is very much with us today, just with a different badge on it. So if we have poorly understood requirements, we get a solution fixing part of the problem, or fixing the wrong problem, or simply moving the problem from A to B. We get unforeseen consequences, and unfortunately those can result in requirements emerging as late as acceptance testing, where we have to go around another cycle of development. A critical failure area from poorly understood requirements is poor usability, so that even though technically superb solution has been delivered, it cannot perform in practice because it's not usable. And poorly understood requirements definitely drive invalid design assumptions. So with any of these symptoms, the solution cannot be fit for purpose. So it's of poor quality and the project will be seen as unsuccessful. The root cause of this: requirements are hard. Customers are weak at imagining. They typically only relate to the problems they've had and solutions that they've already seen. They're busy solving yesterday's problems tomorrow. Human beings are primarily visual. We are primates, but most requirements are captured textually. So customers literally can't see the big picture. And so they take the easy option. They say, I want one of those. So it's easy to see something that already exists. No imagination is needed. The problem is that one of those might not be the right answer. The true requirements are what the customer really needs to solve their problems, not what they think they want and not what they think they would like. And the true requirements may or may not be recognized and accurately documented. Some requirements are implied, as the ISO 9000 series say, and that has a direct impact on the quality and success of the project. When requirements are well understood, when we've got a clear scope and well understood dynamics, we get successes like the 2012 London Olympics.
So we looked at this, but how do different perspectives then complicate things? Because we are all different and have a different perspective. Frank?
So how do we get these hard requirements right? Requirements can really go very wrong from what the user expected to what he actually needed or what he was given. Well-documented requirements reflect the true requirements, and they should be correct, that is, have no substantial errors. They must be complete, have no substantial omissions. They must be coherent, in other words, have no internal contradictions, and usually solution agnostic, so that the supplier of the solution can provide the best means of satisfying the requirements. Now, to get these requirements right, they must be SMART. That is S-M-A-R-T. S standing for singular or specific, no ambiguities in interpreting what is required. Never use the phrase this or that in requirements. They should be consistent and complete. M for measurable. If one cannot verify a requirement, then one cannot demonstrate acceptance, that is compliance or non-compliance. A for achievable or feasible. It's no good specifying a requirement which cannot be met. We often had a joke in the defense industry which said we had a general who wanted a gun that could shoot 35 kilometers, and when finished, he wanted to pack it up and put it in his side holster. R for relevant, no gold plating. Relevant and affordable. If the requirement cannot be shown to contribute to the overall mission or business objective, then it shouldn't be stated or specified. And finally, timed. Requirements should not be open-ended. Requirements must be bounded. One must know when you've actually achieved the requirement. So if one can use this acronym of SMART, then one ensures that the requirements, the hard requirements, get specified correctly and completely.
Frank, quite right. And now let's think about, given all of these issues, given how many projects do not necessarily go to plan and the quality is not managed as well as we would all like it to be, what is it about systems thinking? How can systems thinking help get the requirements right? And there are many approaches and the ways that systems thinking can help. And one of them is, especially with understanding the complete scope of the solution and how it interacts with its environment. So we looked previously at the Millennium Bridge, and this is why we wanted to highlight this again. It was about how does complete scope work, and the complete means How does it work within the context? How does it work within the interaction? How will it function when it's actually in use? And another example we looked at before, and it's worth looking again, is when it comes to understanding the dynamics of the solution in use. So the Terminal 5 and the story around that is what happens once the project is done and the product is actually in use. That is just as important, because systems are dynamic, they're not static. So Terminal 5 is not a static snapshot. It was more to do with how it's being utilized once it's being completed. So moving on to a couple of things that the systems thinking offers as advice. So focusing on effectiveness, not efficiency. So is something effective or efficient? In my mind, can anything really be efficient if it's not effective, if it can't perform the function that is needed? Another thing the system thinking urges us is to consider the bigger picture. These systems don't operate in isolation. So understanding that wider context is very important. For example, our NHS hospital that we discussed earlier. And thirdly, it's about the dynamics. The structure of the system itself impacts the behavior. So knee joint is not as mobile as the hip joint or the shoulder joint, I mean, normally speaking. Other systems approaches that we wanted to share with you today is about some assumptions. Every assumption carries a risk. They need to be made explicit, they need to be tested, and then acted on the findings of that test. Always a good advice is to change perspective, increase the understanding. As Andrew mentioned, we are all very visual. We all have our own perspective. We bring that perspective. And unless we understand one another by changing the perspective and having a look from the other angle, it's going to be more difficult to achieve quality and have successful projects. And lastly, appreciate that mental models do define the current reality and expected futures. So not every apple is the same apple, not every worm is the same worm, depending on where you are coming from. So by applying these approaches, we stand a better chance of achieving the desired result. So Andrew, you were going to bring a few more to the table.
Well, I wanted to talk about reductionism versus holism. And I think the challenge we have here is that in the West, in our European and American culture, we've had centuries of reductionism, reductionist thinking. We analyze things to death, and if we look at apply this thinking to a motor car, then we can see there are lots and lots of little bits in there that we can improve if we want to improve a car. But if we contrast that with holistic thinking, where should our cars be going? Well, actually, we need to be looking outwards from the vehicle itself. We need to be looking at the environment. So we're looking at safety features like interaction with other traffic. We're looking at self-guided vehicles, autonomous vehicles. We're looking at the interaction with the environment. How are these vehicles going to be powered? How do we drive down the amount of pollution they produce? How do we make them safer, more comfortable as road-using vehicles with other road users? So the synthetic approach, looking outwards rather than looking inwards, brings us what is now generally recognized as the way forward for motor transport. Similarly, there are risks associated with reductionism. If we start off with our problem, break that down into independent subproblems, and then start developing bits of solution in isolation, we're running a very serious risk that those items do not combine together to solve our problem, and by the time they do come together, that problem may have changed or moved on. Whereas a holistic approach puts the problem at the heart of the solving exercise, and everything remains tightly linked to solving that problem. If the problem changes, then what we see is a readjustment of the work. And this is at the heart, of course, of Agile project methods. And so putting the solution to the problem as the core allows us to keep a focus on overall solution. And there are some tools on this that I'd like to hand over to Frank, who will talk you through.
Right, thank you, Andrew. Now, systems thinking has several tools which help us to formulate the mental models and the holistic views that have been mentioned previously. These tools help to create a mental or virtual description of the real situation, And then these virtual descriptions of the real system can help us to understand how the real world works, and so understand and formulate the situational problem or complete set of requirements. They help us to see the big picture. So starting from the top left, fishbone diagrams are used to identify all the factors or aspects which affect a particular situation. In other words, to be able to get to all the requirements which are needed. Below that, actor maps are used to identify all the role players involved in a particular situation. So we get to understand the requirements from all the potential stakeholders. And to the right, rich pictures help to understand relationships between the various aspects, the role players, the factors, etc. It's my favorite because not only does it identify the relationships, but understanding them is so important when specifying complete requirements to achieve quality. I sometimes think if T5 had only drawn such a picture, it would have become immediately obvious to them what was going to happen the day they were going to open. Here we've got some more tools, starting with concept maps. These help to break down a complex situation into the hierarchical constituent elements so that we see the relationships throughout the hierarchy. To the right, trend maps. I'm sure everyone's used trend maps, used to predict a response or to forecast an outcome in the future. And finally, at the bottom, causal loop diagrams. Often systems don't respond in a linear fashion. The cause is influenced by the response or the effect. And these diagrams help to understand this cause-effect dynamic relationship of systems. So to do systems thinking, I always say one must be able to see the whole forest and the individual trees all at the same time. And with these tools, it helps us to create that whole and complete big picture to be able to do so.
Thanks, Frank. Now let's have a look at what happens when things actually work well. What happens when we do manage to achieve quality? Does it work in reality?
Well, I'm very pleased that not quite all NHS major IT projects end up in disaster. This was one of the few instances where we ended up with a huge success. The NHS Direct website, NHS Direct is no longer with us in England, is still active in Wales, and this solution actually drives the people who answer the phone if you dial 111. It was aimed to reduce unnecessary visits to GPs and provide a quick digital age alternative to millennials rather than booking a GP appointment. The idea was to provide a series of questions that a GP would ask via the internet so that you could get advice as to what you should do about it. And this varied from stop whining, go and get some paracetamol, right the way through to dial 999 and ask for an ambulance. So NHS IT projects, as you mentioned, Baney, have a very high failure rate. That NHS National Programme for IT, when it was cancelled, wasted £7 billion of taxpayers' money and delivered only a small fraction of the benefits forecast. This project involved a diagnostic expert system, which is the first in large-scale public use. The integration was done between a specialist expert system and a commercial website content management system, and looked for both high performance with thousands of concurrent users and disaster resilience, so requiring automatic switchover between two websites. The big challenge that we were faced, and this is why Agile was not a viable option, was we had people scattered all over the UK, and we even had a team out in New Zealand so that we could do follow the sun working. The red sites were the technical people, the green sites were the clinicians who were providing the knowledge base, and our team in Berkshire would work during the day, then they would pass the work over to the team in Auckland, who would then carry on working through their day, and so we got 20 hours in 24 where these teams were working together. This was a triumph of virtual team working over co-location. Well, first of all, I'm going to say success was achieved. This was delivered in 6 months, not 12. It met all the functional requirements. It blew away the performance requirements, working at 3 times the service level agreement within 2 months without any further tweaking or hardware. It was delivered within budget, And it allowed NHS Direct to go from 5 symptom checkers that it went live with to 44 in just 6 months. The NHS was delighted. They estimated that it saved them £65 million in wasted GP appointments in year one alone, at a cost of £2 million in that first year. And it went on to win 4 awards. How was that achieved? We looked at the complete system and we challenged requirements to achieve control and understood the non-functional requirements. So all the dynamics and all the stakeholders, the actors. We built a team spirit across organizational boundaries, working closely with individuals, and negotiated for the best people to do each task, even though that wasn't necessarily the letter of the contract. And we risk managed it to death. We were very proactive, and we were very proud to get a Queen's Award as a result of this work. Success needs documented requirements that cover the complete scope. The Maginot Line, any historians amongst you, the Maginot Line was the defensive line that France built in the 20s and 30s to prevent any invasion from Germany in the future. And it was impregnable where they built it, but they left a gap at the Ardennes through which the German army poured in 1939. It needs to reflect the dynamics of the solution. So if we look at London's Millennium Bridge, we look at the interaction between the users and Terminal 5. Everything looked great until people tried to use it.
And we have some frequently asked questions on iron triangle or iron pyramid. Shall we have a look at that as well?
My concern is that the iron triangle has been misused. Originally, it was developed by Martin Barnes as a tool to understand what the relative priorities were to achieve a consensus within the project teams. But it has one big problem, and that is it implies that the 3 corners of the triangle have equal value or equal weight. And as the earlier slide I showed from the surveys, that's not the case. And in fact, what I'd like to propose is that the reality is an iron pyramid where the requirements and quality underpin timeliness, which allows you to deliver on budget. So, Frank, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I can only concur with that. If you don't have a good foundation based on requirements which reflect what is the need of and value of the user and what is the quality that the project must deliver, if you don't have that, delivering timely and at budget is irrelevant. So definitely a iron pyramid based on good requirements and quality rather than the iron triangle where quality is only seen as contributing and not being the foundation.
And what about you, Baney?
Yeah, no, on that I agree. You are right. But when it was first coined, the phrase or the triangle itself, it was a very, very good communications tool. And there is great value in getting what was at the time quite a new profession and the new concepts out there, understood, everybody using the same language, everybody understanding the importance of the requirements and time and cost, so the quality, time and cost of a project, and that all 3 need to be considered. And it was fantastic for all of that. But you're also right, things do move on. Our knowledge is refined. We have a lot of good and bad experiences with the project. And I think that the pyramid actually reflects the reality better. It's not to say that the triangle is bad, but this is much better. Because to me, if the requirements are not clear, if the quality is not understood at the outset, then everything else, what we are designing, what we are potentially building, and however long that is going to take and however much that is going to cost, if it's not underpinned by well understood, framed and agreed requirements and quality, it's not at all likely to be fit for purpose and do what is set out to do. So I would like to use the pyramid as perhaps the new communications tool in our discussions in day-to-day lives and projects and programs to further the discussion and a new level of understanding of what this means and why it's so.
Thanks.
So thank you to my fellow panelists and for your patience and listening to us. What you're seeing on the slides now is some information on how you can find out more, and all of this will be shared with you. But before we leave you, we have received a couple of really, really good questions, and I would like to, time permitting, step through several of them at least. And I think the first one I'm going to give to you, Andrew, and it's a very good point. We have a question about the projects that may run over several years, which quite a few complex ones do, and then the market requirements may change over the period, causing a change of requirements from product managers and so on. How can this project creep be effectively managed, or how can this level of project change, if I may paraphrase the question, be effectively managed over such a long period of time?
I think that there are, this sort of raises a couple of questions, really. Firstly is, why does the project have to take so long? I know this is a common phenomenon in defence and major civil engineering, but many areas of project management now are trying to deal with disruption in the environment by massively shortening project timescales as people realize that the business must move quickly, then the projects must move quickly as well. Where that is not, and so the introduction of Agile, I think, is a response to that. And we should be looking wherever possible at shortening project timescales to minimise that. Where project timescales cannot be reduced, then debate is whether it really should be one project or it should be a program. If you've got a long activity, change activity, programs are designed to handle uncertainty and levels of change, and by and large standard project management techniques are not. So the other suggestion I would have under the circumstances is to have a program which is running with a number of small, shorter projects, and each tranche of the program will be delivering some benefits, and then as each tranche is delivered, there will be a realignment going forwards.
Yeah.
I agree. But what I can add here is, if one has a good set of requirements documented in a requirements baseline, you can actually use that baseline to manage the change over time. So even a more important reason for having a good set of defined and agreed requirements as a baseline is that it helps you to manage changes during your project.
Yep, I agree. There's a good change control. Whether you decide to do it via waterfall, agile, as a single project or a program, all of that can be managed through good change control. However, as Frank said quite rightfully, if we don't have good solid set of requirements baseline that have a clear line of sight to the benefit, clear line of sight to why they are there in the first place, that will be difficult to do. With a well-written set of requirements that are very clear with the traceability up to the overall outcome or output you're wishing to achieve, help change control tremendously, and then changes outside the system that you are implementing can be managed better. Frank, there is one more. Sorry, were you going to say something else, Andrew?
I was just going to add, I agree with that completely, and that really challenging and understanding the requirements up front reduces your liability to change later.
Absolutely. Now, there is another question here that I see we still have some time, and I'd like to pose to Frank, and it is about the approach to projects. So the question is, are waterfall projects better at achieving quality than agile run projects? Is it true that the end client often gets less than they expected when agile project is complete? In the fact that the client is not clear what exactly they might get once an agile project is complete. So Frank, would you like to answer that?
Yes, perhaps in terms of the focus that on Agile one focuses on completing within a period of time and within a budget and allowing the scope to float, might imply that that the client might get less than what they were expecting at the end of the day. However, I think if one applies the right model to a particular situation, to me what's important is that the project management model should be driven by the type of product being delivered. So in that case, if one is delivering a product like software, for example, which is very flexible, which can be expanded, and which can have features easily added on at a later stage, then really focusing on limiting the cost and time and letting the scope float is acceptable. Whereas if you try and apply that perhaps to a nuclear power station, it's the wrong type of model being applied to the project, which might leave the customer with less than what they had expected. So to me, as long as we use the right project model for the particular product or service being delivered to the client, then I think the aspect of the client receiving less than what they expected is very much limited.
I'd like to add that I agree with you completely, Frank. What I'd like to add is that in my experience, the benefit of agile approaches is in clarifying the requirements and ensuring that the requirements are fully understood. And in that sense, offers a real opportunity to improve quality, where if you're using the definition of quality as conformance to requirements. With the sorts of projects you were talking about, a nuclear power station or for instance, what you don't want to be doing is agile construction. But I think there is a role for agile in the early stages, in the concept and the definition stages of projects, to ensure that people are given, particularly using prototypes or demonstrators or models or whatever, so that people can literally see what it is they're committing to. And yes. I had a very interesting. Sorry, go on. I talk over. Carry on.
Yes, using, for example, model-based system engineering, augmented reality, virtual reality, you can actually do that kind of showing the customer product before it's actually implemented. And I agree, Agile allows you to tune and adjust your requirements as you go along, getting this very fast feedback from the client in terms of whether what you're delivering satisfies their need and is of value to them. So yes, and sure, if one can apply Agile even to large infrastructure projects by using virtual systems to demonstrate the final solution, it definitely has its place.
Thank you. There is one very specific question about the project, Andrew, that you were talking about. So if you wouldn't mind just very quickly clarifying this before we move on. I think we still have a little bit of time so we can get a few more questions. And that was, how did you manage requirements between the UK and Auckland, given almost no working day overlap?
They were just very highly skilled professionals. They were former team members who had previously worked together in the UK, but some of them had emigrated to Auckland. They were one team. They were not two separate teams, and they worked as one team and communicated, obviously with emails and odd-hour phone calls. And
I assume using a common set of requirements, which both referred to.
Yes. So there was one set of requirements. It wasn't a case of we'll split the requirements between the two teams. It was a team in two halves who were working together as an integrated team. It's just that they were passing work backwards and forwards. And
I'm very glad that this question was asked, because it is often so much is about the overall project, the project as a system itself, which is made out of people as well as the processes and requirements and funding and planning. And all of that needs to come together for it to be a success. There is another theme of questions that is being asked, and I would like to sort of start off with that one. And that is, how do you manage requirements in the design versus the build situation? So in the development of the project versus the delivery of the project, because not all the details are known up front. That is very true. And kind colleagues that have been asking these questions are almost half answering them themselves. We are not, the projects and programs by definition are unique things. We are not talking about manufacturing processes. They are all unique. There is an element of it that is unique. So how do you manage requirements when every project is a unique endeavor? And that is exactly the way that they should be running. You split them into the development and delivery. So within the way that we're doing it in our organization is during those early stages of the development, the overall client's need is understood, the business outcome they wish to achieve is understood, and that remains hopefully static throughout the project or a program. And those requirements are already set. There is another piece of work to be done to actually understand what is physically possible, what option is the best option to eventually deliver, and all of that, those levels of requirements build upon one another until the solution is known, the detail is known, and the last elements are nailed. So that doesn't mean that they actually change. They do develop during the development and then get delivered during the delivery. I don't know if you two gentlemen have a maybe different view or additional points.
Yes, I think one should distinguish between requirements that are designed to or develop to requirements and requirements which are actually build to or buy to requirements. It's usually the build to and buy to requirements that are more static and fixed, because at that stage the solution is known, whereas the develop or design to requirements up at front at the initial stages of the project, those are the ones that are perhaps more flexible, and where perhaps even agile techniques can be used to address those kind of flexibility that one would want to encourage in actually tuning the solution to better satisfy the value or the need of the client. But once it's fixed and you go into your buy to and build to and manufacture to requirements, then they become more static.
I'd like to add to what you've said there, Frank, because that's it's a distinction that I try and stress to people. It's the difference between requirements and specifications. Now, those are two words that are often used virtually interchangeably, but the requirements are what the business needs fulfilling, whereas the specification is what the solution is going to be that delivers that. And if we get confusion between the two, the specification, which will be developing and changing quite rapidly throughout the design process, if that's confused with the requirements, which by and large should be reasonably static once you understand what the situation is, it can cause a lot of confusion. And if you are not careful, requirements may not be gathered, because what you get is a specification. And I had a beautiful example of this given to me recently, where on the Astute class submarines, for years they've been using exactly the same approach for chilled water supplies. And partway through the Astute build, they sent out the requirements for the chilled water supply for, I think it was the fourth boat in the series. And the supply came back and said, you know, we can't meet this specification anymore. There isn't enough room for 3 chillers in there. Can we understand your requirements? So they went back to the requirements and said, you don't need 3 chillers, you only need 2. You know, our reliability and so on is such, performance output is you only need 2. So from boat 4 onwards, there are only 2 water chillers in there. The true requirements were hidden behind documented requirements, which didn't reflect the true requirements. And
yes,
so that's
I think that
carries on. So.
Andrew, I think that's a good example of where in specifying the requirements, the solution is specified rather than the requirement is specified. Yeah. And then it doesn't become solution agnostic. It's already, the solution is constrained or specified in the requirement. And that leads to situations like you have, where the wrong requirement, where the solution is met because the requirements are not specified, the solution is specified.
Yeah.
Thank you both. And thank you everybody for such a good set of questions. There are plenty more questions that have been asked. Unfortunately, I'm looking at the time, we're running out of time, and we won't be able to answer them right here, right now. However, we will answer them and provide the information along with the materials that you have been looking at. They will be made available alongside with the links to our SIG site, and where you can see much more, have a look at the resources that are already available, and of course you would be more than welcome to join our SIG and help contribute further towards these topics. So that just leaves me to thank you all once again for your time and contribution, and hopefully the last hour has been valuable as much to you as it was to us.